Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. As we move through today's program, we invite you to submit any questions that you have. The Q&A tab is located on the left side of your screen. Type your questions into the Ask Question box at the bottom, submit, and we'll go through your questions live at the end. Any questions that we don't get to today, we will follow up with you after the webinar. We encourage you to engage with us during our presentation. Any commentary and insights, just drop it in the chat. Now, to officially welcome you to today's Software AG webinar titled Champions Run on ARIS, Custom Nike Shoes Fireside Chat. Today's program will be presented by Michael Shank, founder of Process Inventory Advisors, and Mark Miller, our virtual host, J.M. Erlinson, ARIS Global Evangelist. J.M., over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Alana. I appreciate it. And welcome to everyone from around our community. We are excited to have you here for this fantastic fireside chat with a tremendous guest. Now, we're going to go through a couple of things today. You'll get a chance to learn a little bit about how Mike has seen the world, how he's built transformational success based off of some of his original ideas. And of course, at the end, we'll give you an opportunity to make some really cool shoes so that I love to tell a little old adage. My grandfather always said that there is one thing that everybody needs in this world. If you have the means, if you're walking all the time, you need a good pair of shoes. You need a good foundation upon which to stand. In today's conversation, we're going to talk about the foundations of organizational change. And what I wanted to start with is an introduction to our guest speaker. Now, if you haven't read his bio, or my goodness, if you haven't read his book, hello, friends, maybe you missed a little bit about him. But before we get started with some of the content, I'd like to pass it over. Mike, tell everyone on the line who you are and what your experience has been with digital transformation.
For sure. And JM, ARIS Software AG, thank you so much for having me. So a little bit about me. So I spent most of my career in consulting. So 13 years at Accenture. And I started there, I was a technologist, a Java C++ programmer. I was a solution architect. I led large development programs. And then I spent 2 years at Bank of America in that same technology role. Then I joined Ernst & Young, and they didn't have a mature technology practice back then. So one of my first projects was at a large bank, and they asked us to create a capability model. So I did some interviews with the business, and we created a model that represented what they did 3 levels deep. And I just thought it was so powerful. I was like, wow, I was so excited by all the possibilities just to communicate how things worked. And I was as a technologist, I didn't know what the business did. My focus was on getting code on time, defect free, et cetera. So I dedicated the rest of my career within EY to that. So I started first the business architecture practice, and then I morphed it into head of process excellence because I realized business architecture and capabilities doesn't go far enough. To really to succeed in transformation, you have to go to the process level detail. So as I'm grateful for my career because I always say, I encountered the gremlins of chaos all the time, where leadership was trying to run a transformation, but they didn't communicate what they wanted. Teams didn't know what they were doing, what they were accountable for. Plans were unrealistic, and I could go on and on. And I developed this framework called the Process Inventory Framework, and I kept applying it to different situations, writing requirements and running a large transformation and doing risk management. And it just worked every time. And in that time, I was a big user of ARIS. So I developed this framework, and I had to write a book. I spent then 2 years at Citibank as the head of process excellence for the U.S. Retail Bank. I left there in March of last year, and I dedicated myself to writing the book and now starting a consulting practice based on it. But really, I look at it as I'm a fan of ARIS. I'm a user of ARIS. I think this is a guidebook for how to use ARIS and connect it to enterprise value.
That's a fantastic introduction. I think we had a chance to meet while you were at Citibank, and I think that when we take a look at how to understand enterprises, that's a big challenge. It's a huge elephant to eat. So the old adage, "How do you eat an elephant?" Well, it's one bite at a time, right? Yeah. But I think that there's one thing that happens before that. You have to plan out how you're going to get there, right? Yeah. You're not going to just start taking random bites. You need a structure that you can actually drill through. You can understand the scope. You can make decisions. And you can proceed in a like sort of a logical fashion that helps you show value and then grow your influence. And I think that's that you really outline that really well in the book. And at the end of it, we'll tell you how to get one of these things even for free. But before we go through that, I wanted to talk about today's topic, and particularly digital transformation success. Let's first talk about the why, right? How do we get here, and what risks or consequences of not taking action exist in the space of digital transformation? So I know everyone's been going through transformations. We keep talking about transformations. Everyone's changing the companies. They're all pivoting. They're all doing whatever, right? But why are they doing that? Let's start with a big question. What is it? What is the motivators that cause you to have to make a change in the way you do business, or even a change to the fundamentals of your business?
Yeah, so it's so let's define transformation. Transformation
Sure.
is a profound manner in which you run your business and deliver value for your customers. And we all know the external environment is changing rapidly. Obviously with technology advancements, AI, automation, political, economic, there's a lot of external factors, competitive. So I flashed this up here. So, every organization has a mission. So why do you exist? And then you have a vision, and you never get there because it's always something you're striving for. But that forms your strategy. But as the external environment, specifically the competitive environment, changes, these are relatively stable, but you have to re-examine those. And I put in here the PESTEL framework for political, economic, social, technology, et cetera, and then the 5 forces framework. And then you could also do the internal analysis, your strengths and weaknesses. But organizations from a strategy perspective need to look at who they are, where are they in the competitive landscape, and are they good enough to get to where they want to be? And sometimes they do an assessment, and there's the classic example of Nokia in 2007. They had 51% of the market share, and then this little company called Apple came out with the iPhone with its superior touchscreen interface and better operating system. Well, that put Nokia in a severe disadvantage. They couldn't transform fast enough. And you fast forward to 2013, they lost 90% of their market share and ended up selling the phone business to Microsoft. So it's organizations need to continually look at where they're positioned, and then drive the type of change that they need internally to be where they want to be.
Yeah, that makes sense. And here's the thing. It's not a one and done, right? Transformation is, I like to say this, it's also a lifestyle, right? You understand the emergence of new technology, the pressures in changing market spaces, the pressure in global factors that you don't understand today, tomorrow. This whole space is continuously evolving. I actually had a conversation yesterday with a really good friend of mine who's somebody who does board evaluations. And these reevaluations every year, as they help to try and hone themselves towards how their strategy will help to make their mark in the market. Yeah. And that's fascinating. It's a complicated and time-consuming process, but it seems like it's inevitable. You have to hone in on what tomorrow is going to look like for you today. Otherwise, you can't get. So you need to transform. That's an important part of the puzzle. The question then is, why is that so hard? And why do we see, and I think you talk about this as a statistic, why do we see so many transformations, frankly, failing, like considered a failure of transformation and serious negative consequences on the business?
Yeah. So, and I put some stats up here. So, and this is a generally accepted stat that 70% of transformations fail. And I found the stat too that the global spend on transformation programs is going to exceed $3.4 trillion. A massive amount of lost investments. But like I mentioned with the Nokia thing, it's lost competitive advantage, frustrated stakeholders, customers aren't getting what they want. And we know that they could vote with their feet, so they could go to where they're getting the experience they need. Ultimately, and there's a lot of, you could read, a lot of different perspectives out there. And I think they're all right. But I think if you look at the root of it, and I mentioned chaos earlier, but it's the complexity of our organizations. Our organizations have grown so complex with a massive people, process, technology environment. These require a multi-year kind of disciplined and focused effort to transform. And everyone has their own unique languages and perspectives. That getting all of that kind of size of an organization, that complex organization, kind of focused on something transformational, it's just so hard. And I put in here that I think the ones the 30% that succeed, I think they have transformation leaders with superhuman capabilities, because you have to be on top of everything. Now, that's not scalable. That's not something that I think we need a more structured approach to get there.
Yeah, I think I hear that from a lot of my customers here is they say, well, we have a very talented leader or we have a very talented team undergoing a Herculean effort that
Yeah.
they are uniquely positioned to do. Well, the number of people who are uniquely positioned to drag the organization by their strength of their will is very small. And it's the competition, the war for talent is huge right now.
Yes.
So good luck. If you got lucky, rolled the dice and came up with a circumstance and a leadership and a team that's able to do that, well done. That's organizational privilege.
Yeah.
But for the rest of us and for everyone who's looking to try and transform, we need to figure out how to make it so that you don't have to have
Yes.
lightning in a bottle circumstance to make transformation stick. And I think that leads me to the big question is what have you learned? So you've been assessing transformations, you've been working in that sort of space. What have you learned from seeing failure, from seeing the motivations and reasons why transformation is important that started you down the path towards what you write about in the book of digital transformation success and what we're going to talk about today in the how?
Yeah, I think ultimately, the confusion is a lack of alignment that people just don't. And we talk about siloed organizations and the business technology disconnect, and people in the ground don't know kind of what does it mean for me? Like I hear the executives talk about transformation, but I don't know what do I need to do to accomplish this? And that's why I put in here. I think that the key to success is getting the organization into alignment. And that's two things. That's vertical alignment. So going from your C-suite down to your individual contributors, everyone knows their role. Everyone knows what they need to do to advance the cause of transformation. And then horizontal alignment. So getting all the teams, business, technology, risk, operations, et cetera, understanding what they need to do, building collaboration so that those silos are now gone. And then everyone, and then this transformation is working efficiently. I think to get to that alignment, and I put in here kind of in a real tangible way, because alignment has been talked about for decades, and you could go back to articles, and I think there's kind of soft versions, but I'm talking about like a very tangible alignment. A common language is needed so that we could all break down these different perspectives and really communicate with each other how we get this done.
Yeah. One of the ways that I say a lot of this sort of idea of alignment is I want to understand and see visually, which is going to require that common language and understanding, an unbroken chain of influence between a strategic pillar or vision or an objective for the organization and how we're going to get there, the specific work steps. And you said something to me, of course, Mike and I have been jamming at this webinar for a while, but I really like this. You said the words, do the hard work. Yes. Which is the scariest thing, I think, for a lot of folks to think about, because not only is transformation hard, but getting your hands around transformation is the hard work.
Yes. Yeah. So our organizations, especially if they've, mergers, acquisitions, they've just grown to get all this waste and inefficiency. So you've got to understand where the dead bodies are. Like who does what, and it really goes to and Jane, you said it earlier. Nobody can predict the future. So if we're talking about the transformation strategy, we're not going to know. 5 years out, maybe 10 years out. It starts to get 15 years out. It gets cloudy. Like AI, like technology is moving fast. So we've got to get to a state where we're agile, where we could respond to these changes in a very quick manner and adapt to the latest and greatest, so that we could keep and maintain our competitive positioning. And to do that, like you mentioned, you have to do the hard work. You have to understand where all those wastes and inefficiencies are. You have to make it transparent to everyone, so we know how to either eliminate or manage them, or worst case, even just work around it. But it's all transparent for us to navigate.
Well, I see a lot of folks in the audience, which is great. Hello, friends. I'd love to get your feedback on this, because I'm sure you have struggled through transformations. You've had challenges in your organization, achieving some of your specific goals, even things you had measured, and it's hard to get to that level. I want to open a poll and put it out to our audience here about what their number one transformation challenge is. And if it doesn't fit, I understand, but let's open up that poll and take a look at what people's number one transformation challenge is. And I put that on everyone should have gotten a notification for a poll being open on the screen. So answer away. Is it change management, technology, process standardization, strategy alignment, roles and accountability, executive buy-in, or team and competencies, or other, although 7 options is already enough for me. So I'm seeing these come in, and I got to tell you, Mike, an early leader in the voting is already strategy alignment.
Yeah.
And was that unexpected? I mean, from what you're saying, I don't think that. I think it's a given from a lot of people. We also see process standardization as something people are talking about. When you think about trying to take best practices and lessons learned from organization to organization and come up with a collective decision on how we're going to do something, there is politics. There's also, and another thing that came out there is change management, roles and accountability. I'm seeing those as like the primary things people are talking about. But can I tell you one other thing that's very low? Technology.
Yeah.
Because as we like to say, it's a fool with a tool is still a fool.
Yes.
So you need to change structures. You need to change people. You need to change hearts and minds. You need to build visibility. And you need to do that in an established framework that we can collectively adopt and that we can rationalize and realize within the organization. So I'm going to close the poll. Thank you for everyone voting. And I mean, those are some top process standardization, strategy alignment, and change management ended up becoming our top options. I think not that unexpected.
Those are great ones. I mean, just absolutely fantastic. I have a friend who works in just the strategy alignment one, who works at a technology company, and the CEO or the C-suite came out and said, "Okay, one of our strategies, we're going to be SaaS first." Like, okay, that's a great strategy, but he's like, "What does that mean for me?" And what I mean by alignment is you need to take that broad kind of vague statement, and it means something to the marketing team. It means something to the sales team. It means something to the engineering team, the support team, et cetera. And all what I'm talking about here is taking that broad, vague statement and getting very specific into what it means for everybody. Mm-hmm. But you can't do that unless you map out your entire process environment.
So you're leading into the solution, which I think is great.
Yes.
Because my next question, the big one for today, is what does our audience need to know? What are some tools to help them solve the challenges in transformation? And tell me about what you talk about in the book, Process Inventory.
So so with this slide, and I think, and I'll make a bold statement, but I think the current conventional thinking on process is limited, if not wrong. Everyone thinks about process as something to improve, standardize, optimize, and those are awesome goals. But I think process means so much more. If you think about Google Maps, right? Google Maps is a massive data integration project because you've got traffic information, you got weather information, you got restaurant ratings, you got all this stuff, right? So how do they integrate all that? They integrate it by something called the ground truth. So everything needs to reconcile to the ground truth. For them, it's obvious, it's the physical environment. So what process means here, though, is we've got in an organization, we have tons of data. We have tons of operational data in unconnected data stores with their own taxonomy and their own language. Now, there is no current method to pull all that together. But I think process represents the ground truth for an organization. So if you could identify every single process within your organization, now you could take all that data and align it in a world-class tool like ARIS. And now you could have your entire environment mapped out through this lens, through this business-oriented lens of process. Now that now becomes the key for unlocking all organizational knowledge. It is the common language for facilitating alignment across everyone. It connects dots. To me, it's a game changer in how we understand how our organizations operate, but more importantly, how we transform them to get to where we need.
You said unlocking knowledge, and I wanted to tone in on that because the truth is you're not, with this framework, you're not necessarily creating new knowledge. What you're doing is reorganizing existing knowledge, things you've already paid dearly for. You pay so much money to consulting groups, to your own employees, to building systems with technologists. Like all this stuff exists already. The problem is it's stored in shared drives or in SharePoint or in people's heads or on desktop procedures. Like it is. So your company already could have this, but because it's not brought together, it's really hard to actually move anything because you end up falling into this complicated puzzle box of everything is interlocking and you don't know which piece will move which other piece. Without a lever to make a change, you are stuck in place. And I think this is a great way of asking people to show you an X-ray of this puzzle box. Okay, so let me understand what I need to move so I can see the levers that are required, and I can know that if I move this one, I'm trapped forever.
Yeah, it makes everything transparent. It makes all the connections known so that impact analysis is clear. I want to get, I want to acquire a company. Okay, what are the processes? How do I integrate those in?
Mm-hmm.
I want to retire a certain system. Okay, what are all the processes and people and everything that's associated with it? It's incredibly powerful for answering any question that you could ask about the environment.
Yeah, I love that. So then I want to ask, because this biz kind of a business architecture first model, but tell me about all of the different stakeholders and views that go into making this stick for your extended community, your stakeholder groups.
Yep. So here's another kind of bold statement. So I used to call myself a business architect. I don't anymore, because I think I think both of the communities have got it wrong. Business architecture is all about modeling the organization at a 30,000 foot level through a capability model, which is their anchor model. So that leaders can drive decisions about what capabilities are important, where do you invest, et cetera. And then process management is all about understanding at a ground level how things work so that you could do analysis and improve, et cetera. Those two things have never worked together. I think in the view of one model, multiple views, there's got to be a direct lineage between the 30,000 foot level and the ground level, and even deeper, so that you could slice and dice and do the analysis at the level of analysis that you particularly need. So with this process inventory framework, it's two things. I mentioned it's the data integration, but it's also modeling the environment. And what process inventory is it's inventorying every single process that your organization does. Now, how do you get to every single one? Well, you have to anchor something that's complete, which is the organizational hierarchy. So it's an interview process. You start at the top of the hierarchy and you just ask a simple question: what is it that you do? And as stakeholders tell you, you take their responses and you write it down in verb, noun, process names. And then you go to their teams and ask them the same question. You go to their teams and ask them the same questions until you get to a level where you feel like you've gotten all the processes documented right. Now, then you go back up the chain, and I'm a big fan of, because this has got to be accurate and complete, and people have to believe that it represents their environment. You ask for formal attestations so that everyone says, yes, this is the process environment. Now you have that common language to do all the alignment. So, if you look at this chart on the right, now you have your process inventory. You could align it to a capability model so that you have your abstract representation of capabilities aligned with your real understanding of processes on the ground. And when I say, and I just want to make sure one thing that I stress this point, when I say process inventory, that's for each and every organization. So if I have, and I was at Citi, for instance, you could open an account in the mortgage, in the retail bank, in credit cards, et cetera. I want each of those instances identified in their own part of the taxonomy, because you can't standardize processes unless you see them. So I think there's a link between process inventory and capability models. Then obviously you could take each of those process names, model them, and then do all your operational resource and information alignment that we talked about from a data perspective. But then you could go up that, these are processes defined in an organizational context, but then there's the end-to-end, your customer journeys and your value streams, which cut across your organizational context. So you could now link that through. And a big benefit of that is if I see a problem or an opportunity in my customer experience, now I could see that, and I could drive it down to the specific process, the specific technology, the specific people, so that I could quickly do root cause analysis. So it's one model to do everything, and I found it, and when I've used this in various scenarios, to be extremely powerful.
Yeah, so I'm seeing sort of journeys and value streams to capabilities to processes to the metadata underneath it. I want to look at the ecosystem around it. And there's some of what you talked about on the previous slide, but you're bringing in multiple stakeholders.
Mhm.
Who actually owns this process inventory versus who is a contributor? Like what's the racy on how you do this, and how do you gain buy-in and support for this to actually be operationalized?
Yep. So there's and I put in here, building a process capability, a process center of excellence, name it what you will. But
Sure.
you need, and I've stated this when I help clients, is the artifacts in these models are process COE facilitated, but it's business owned. So that's key. Is you've got to understand, you've got to define what your strategy is, and this is all kind of all the things I think you need to define when you stand this up. But why are you doing this? Because those decisions are going to help you drive design decisions on what frameworks you implement, what are your roles, etc. You have to define the frameworks. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, which one of those are important in your context?
Mm-hmm.
And then how do they connect? What's the meta model of information? The third is your value case. Is I'm a big, I'm very practical. I think creating models with no actual tangible way to add value to the organization is not useful for anyone. So you've got to define, how do I change my strategy process so I can understand impacts? How am I changing the change process so that I could leverage this common language to define scope and write better requirements? How am I changing my risk management facility so that I'm using this process as a basis for risk assessments and control designs? Then you've got to define the operating model. So a lot of, and I'm sure people on this webinar, the first question people think about is, okay, that's great. Process inventory. That sounds like a lot of work. My organization changes all the time. How am I going to keep this up to date? Well, you need a set of governance processes. And I in the process COE, you're going to have some governance processes. And I think there's two ways to answer that question. One is you have to have a process that goes out on a periodic basis, 6 months, a year, et cetera, and re-polls the stakeholders to say, is this still accurate, or what am I changing so that I can make it accurate? And then two, if you drill this into how your organization works through these value cases, now everyone has a vested interest. So a first and second line of defense team doing a risk assessment, their first question should be, can we revalidate that this process inventory is accurate? So now it just becomes the fabric of how this organization works. So you've got to define, all those processes, what's your team doing, and then your external ownership roles. What is a process owner? What is a value stream owner? What is a capability owner? Like, how are all these roles and responsibilities defined so that they can work? And then tooling, obviously, how are you going to use ARIS and all the stuff in there. The other thing I think you mentioned, JM, is I just want to stress this too, is this takes an organizational commitment. It takes leadership. It takes investment. So you do need to sell this to the top of the house so that they can understand the value of this and how to manage it. So all of this has to work together. And I think this is where this partnership between ARIS and process inventory framework is so powerful, because it's more than a tool. You've got to organize yourself as a company to be able to leverage ARIS and this concept of process to deliver enterprise value that you're looking for.
Yeah, I sell the value proposition. And I want to just stay on this slide and this topic for a little while, because I think this is really important. This is the kind of, how do we get there? I leverage this conversation around value quite a lot with organizations that have struggled. I'll give you an example. When I worked with a hedge fund a few years ago that had a huge process inventory, like a lot of stuff in. And when I say inventory, that is a very kind word for what it was. They had a dumping ground for a bunch of processes. 1,200 to be exact. And when I talked to them about it, they said 5 years ago we had a major SI in. They did a consulting firm, and they did a big project for us, built all these models. It was millions of dollars. And I said, okay, well, what do you think? What do you think about the process? They said, oh, we're just showing you what we used to have. We don't look at this anymore because it was never kept up to date. And I said, how much did it cost you to build? They said millions. I said, and how much is it going to cost you now to do this again? They said millions. I said, how much do you think it would have cost you for the period of time of 5 years for you to maintain this? And they said,
Yes.
I don't know, a couple of FTEs. And I was like, so the ROI on creating this like way of working that is
Yes.
built in continuous update, refreshing information, keeping people appraised of changes, being able to create a collaborative environment, the ROI on that is tremendous. And
Yes.
you spoke about the word agility earlier.
Mhm.
And you spoke about it with response to market pressures. You spoke about it with an operating method for a company.
Yep.
You want to talk agility? Think about the difference between a rolling start and a cold start.
Yes.
It's massive. Once you're moving, you can use that energy to direct where you want to go. But if you're starting from nothing, the starting inertia on these sorts of projects can be tremendous. So you're establishing something, right? You're establishing something you can grow from. Tell me about when you build the team in a let's say a process center of excellence. What are you looking for from like interplay with other parts of the company? Are you looking for people who have experience with IT, experience with HR, experience with operational processes, back-end processes? What are you trying to build in terms of competencies so they can understand some of the challenges that they're going to face both in creating and in keeping this information?
I think all all those skill sets and knowledge are great, but I think probably more important is a discipline, is understanding how you're going to do this, and understanding, like, if I'm an HR expert and I'm going to HR to ask for what their processes are, I want to make sure that the voice of the business has to be first and foremost. And you've got to use their terminology, because at the end of the day, they've got to own it. And for them to own it, they feel like you've got to make sure that they have their stamp on it and they sign off on it. Other than that, the head of the process center of excellence, to me, has to have a laser focus on, and this goes to your example, a laser focus on quality and accuracy, right? I've always had a role in here of your quality review. So if I see a process inventory, and you've got to define standards for all this stuff, but if it comes in and it doesn't align to, say, proper BPMN standards or proper whatever standards you define, and those are important because everything has to look accurate, or everything has to look consistent and accurate. And you've got to say to people, like, I'm not accepting this if it does not fit our standards, because at the end of the day, and this goes to your example, stakeholders are going to look at this. And if they say, this doesn't represent my business, that's a fatal flaw, and that this whole thing is going to collapse. So you've got to have leadership and a team that cares about this, that is laser focused on quality.
Yeah. And also the thing that I think about a lot is the idea of lowering the barrier to entry, because one of the key barriers in quality is access, right? Good information getting from the head onto the digital paper into the repository can be a cumbersome process if it is a cumbersome process. It seems crazy to sound like that, but it really is a tautology. You need to tailor an interface to match up with your different stakeholders' needs or capabilities and their aptitudes, the way in which they're used to seeing information. If it smells like their own, they're more likely to go and contribute information, which is why when I think about the way that ARIS does that with the ARIS contributor or the Viewer Pro license, where they're able to go in and modify fact sheet content as a sort of a picture rather than a thing rather than making it so that you have to go through and do a full model exercise. That changes the nature of the relationship. It doesn't say I'm asking you to do all the work. It's saying that I'm going to do the hard work. I'm only asking you to do the hard thought work. I'll put it into context.
Yes, that's exactly right. You want process owners' knowledge. You don't want them necessarily modeling.
No. But once again, they have great knowledge. You want to invite them in, allow them to become a true part of your community, and they can have conversations. I mean, good Lord, they're part of the governance process. So that's the idea, is that they get to be part of this. So I want to move to something that is really gives us a tangible ground upon which to stand, because you've done this before. And I want to ask you for, let's say, 2 examples on where you might have done this in the past. And then we're going to ask a question to our audience. Actually, you know what? Before we go to the tangibility, let's ask this question. When hearing the things that Mike is talking about, and something we're discussing, and your own capabilities within the organization that you have and the people that you've been working with, where do you think you are on your capability level in order to meet the transformation goals you have set in front of you? I've opened a poll. And I'd love to get some ideas from people. Are you unprepared to meet your goals? And there's no shade or shame. It's a friendly audience. Mike and I are gonna we'll just give you love anyways. Do you have some basic capabilities, but you struggle to scale effectively? Are you able to build a strategy and roadmap, but scaling is cumbersome? Do you have pockets of excellence, but struggle to see that enterprise wide? Or why are you here? You guys are the experts. You might as well be talking in this instead of us. So early results on this one. I'm already seeing people. We see that most people are at a 3 or a 4. A couple are at a 1. Welcome and hello. You are welcome in this home we've created together. But the current winning vote is a 4. We see pockets of excellence, and I think that's an interesting comment. Yeah. So let's see. Right now, our number one answer is pockets of excellence. I feel like you've seen the pockets of excellence problem. I'll leave a couple more seconds for people to vote, but mostly it's a 4, and then below that is a 3 in terms of their ability. So strategy and roadmap, but scaling is cumbersome. Hmm. So the question is, when you see the idea of pockets of excellence, have you taken that and some tangible examples from individuals, once again, those Herculean efforts, to something that the enterprise can actually use?
I think ultimately, I think people want to do the right thing. And I think there's investment. As you mentioned, the organization you cited, people are investing the money in this. I think what's lacking is a vision for how to do it. And that's hopefully what I'm providing. And I hope, the people on the webinar, check out more of my content and agree with me. But ultimately, I think it's, and go to Process Inventory Advisors or processinventory.com. But I think it's getting that understanding of there is a better way. There is a, that you need to look at, communicate with your leadership, get people rallied around, and then implement. I think it's there. We just need to do it. So. Do you want me to go into the example?
I'd love the tangible examples. I mean, this is a great conversation, but tell me a couple of examples of where you've seen this really work.
So this is one in my consulting days. I led a large transformation for an insurance company. So the situation was large global insurance company wanted to spin off their U.S. retail business because it wasn't part of their strategy. U.S. retail business defined their strategy as they wanted to be a low-cost insurance provider and they did not want to inherit any of the old parents' technology because they thought it was too complex and too costly, which it absolutely was. So they asked us to create something called a city plan to drive the strategy and the implementation from there. So essentially what we did is went to each leader and asked them, what is their inventory of processes? And then we did some light requirements on those processes. And then we did a strategy. And their strategy was they wanted to be a low-cost insurance provider. So they only really wanted to be best in class in a couple customer-facing things. Other than that, they wanted to be best in cost. So we did light requirements and we did some strategy work with them and either labeled it best in class, best in cost. And that drove their roadmap and their investment strategy. And they ended up going like predominantly cloud and external vendors. But it really shaped the rest of their program. So as they kind of went through, prioritized different business areas, then we use that process inventory as their scoping. So what processes are in scope from the process project charter perspective, and then we ran that through the entire SDLC. So if you think about this common language being, okay, now what is my target state process environment looks like, and the whole operating the model around it. What are my requirements? And if you use this taxonomy of processes for your requirements, now you keep that alignment to what the business has to do. Then you could do your control assessment, your testing, ultimately your people change management, defining your procedures, your job aids, your training, aligned to what processes people actually have to perform was amazingly efficient. And then running and tracking this whole thing from a status dashboard in terms of what is the status of my processes as I go through this journey was incredibly helpful just to run this transformation efficiently. And ultimately it was a complex endeavor, so I don't want to minimize it, but ultimately I've never seen something run kind of as efficient as this.
Wow. And it sounds like this is one of those cook once and serve many situations where
Yeah.
that process standardization became process language became a standard way of serving new deliverables to different stakeholder groups, but all the same content, just rendered for their needs.
Yeah.
But we also talk about this as a way of helping to do risk management and to pull process and GRC sort of into this interlock. Where have you done that before?
So I'll reiterate, most of my career has been in financial services in consulting. So I worked at almost all the large banks, insurance companies, wealth management, et cetera. Obviously, in banking, it's one of the most heavily regulated industries around, and there's a lot of. And you could look at a newspaper or look online, and you could see consent order MRAs. Like there's always these big banks are always getting in trouble for one thing or another. One of the things that I think is most important is there's a standard tool called the GRC, which is your platform for your risk information. Now, at the core of a GRC is your data model, which is what are my processes? Because you need to have your business context. What are my processes? What are the risks on those processes? What are the controls on those risks? What are the monitors on those controls? And it's a kind of one-to-many data model that expands as you go out.
Right.
Now, a lot of these big banks use a common process taxonomy that covers all of their businesses, like an APQC process classification framework. Now, the problem is, and in this example, you have a diverse set of businesses. So when they do their risk assessments, they look at this common process taxonomy. They're like, my business doesn't look like this, but I'm going to interpret what this taxonomy says versus what my business does and just do some joins to it. Now, I think this is the root of their problem because now there's a ton of interpretation in the data that's not documented. And then different stakeholders, your three lines of defense, have to interpret it different. Now, the key to this and what we did here is we did a process inventory for all of their bank. And then we took this data and we took their GRC data and aligned it to what processes each organization actually did. And that showed a lot of gaps in. They had processes or controls in there that no one was thinking about, no one owned. It drove better accountability. And ultimately, as they implemented it, it helped them drive to a stronger control environment.
I mean, it sounds good. I got to tell you, we could go through this for days and days, but you said the word accountability and I love it. I think that we need to help drive accountability and then have accountability drive success and progress, because we like to say one throat to choke. You need to have somebody accountable for this so that you can make sure that it gets done and it gets done right and the people are organized around it. But I always want to put accountability back on you and I, my friend. We're not going to stop this because we've been talking for a long time, and I want to open up a couple of minutes for folks to jump in the chat and ask a question in case they had anything on their mind. We can highlight these questions and we'll answer, let's say, 2 questions live. So if you put yourself in the chat, we can get back to you immediately with some responses on some thoughts you have about what Mike's introduced today. One of the questions we already had was, are you going to record this so we can share this with leaders in our orgs? I certainly hope you can get their eyes on this sort of thing, because when a leader sees this kind of approach, they can make a decision, right? They can actually put a mandate in place for them to have a common language, to have a common platform like ARIS, and then to build those pieces of the puzzle. So we have a couple of great questions here. How do you get started and deliver proven success in order to justify scaling? Oof, tough question.
So I think it starts with, you don't have to create a process inventory for the entire enterprise. You could create it for one line of business. And I've when I've done this, I've shown this to leaders, like, oh, wow, it's so powerful just to see everything my organization does in kind of one model. But you tackle whatever the challenges that's important for your organization. You build it once, you tackle that challenge, then you show leadership the benefits of it, and then 9 times out of 10 they'll allow you to scale, because obviously you're solving a problem that is massive for them.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one. The other one, though, the second question we'll answer, and this is the last one for the day. Mike, this is a tough one, but you've started to answer it, but I want a distinct answer so people can take this home. How is a process inventory framework differentiated and integrated with a capability framework? What's that difference? How do we make it work?
This is a great one. So I look at it, and I did a post on LinkedIn if people want to follow me, but it's the difference between the dictionary and the thesaurus. So a dictionary in a process context defines every single process that happens in the organization aligned to all the organizational contexts that it happens. What a capability model is by definition, organizationally agnostic. So it's a somewhat of an abstract framework. It's valuable, but it's abstract. So if you can map your processes and your process inventory framework to the appropriate, say, level 3 capability, now I could understand where, and the use case where this is important is process standardization. So in order for me to say, in the example I used, there could be multiple account openings depending on the line of business. I can't standardize unless I could see it. So if you map each of those individual processes to a capability, now I could use that capability as the thesaurus, give me all the like things that are like this across the organization. Now I could know what processes are there, who owns those processes, and all the resources, technology, vendors, et cetera, that make that up. And now, to your cold start, now I don't have a cold start because I have the details, and now I'm going straight into solutioning.
I love it. I love it. Well, Mike, this was fantastic. And I know folks' brains are burning. Let's give them a little bit of time to relax, take a breath, and make some shoes. And also, we'd love to talk to you a little bit more. If you'd like to talk about ARIS, if you'd like to have more conversations, we're available at aris.com. Come back to Software AG and tell us how you felt and what things we might be able to do better together. Well, thank you so much for your time and attention today. And most importantly, from my perspective, thank you so much to Mike. That was an unbelievable conversation around the process inventory framework, some challenges we've seen in digital transformation, and how you've seen it actually work in reality. Mike, any final thoughts for our wonderful attendees before we leave them to make some shoes?
Thank you for thanks for hosting me. This is an amazing event. If people want to learn more about me, find me on LinkedIn. Go to processinventory.com, which is the website for my consulting company, and check out the book on Amazon.
Once again, thank you so much for coming to everybody. Please come to more of these events. We will host even more if you like it. We're going to keep doing it. And I got some folks in the background, Renata and Alana, who are unbelievable supporters of thought leadership, getting out to the many folks we love to work with in the ARIS software world. Well, thank you so much, and have yourselves a wonderful afternoon. Make some shoes and let us know how we did. Maybe even win a handy dandy book. Have a great afternoon, folks, and thanks so much for coming.